Okay, do we have any veterans in the group? Veterans, military veterans. Well, thank you for your service. You were Air Force, Army, Navy? Army? All right.
Army National Guard.
Good, good. Anyone who has been to the academy or attended a service academy or is interested in going to an academy? Okay. So mostly you're here. Oh, okay. One over there, one potential. I got the paperwork. We'll sign you up. Okay. My name is Blake. I graduated from here in 1978, so quite a few years ago. Did 30 years in the Air Force, and then in uniform, and then 10 years as an Air Force civilian, and ended up here in Space Command for 5 years doing space stuff. So now the military is getting into space, right? It's happened, right? When I was here in 1978, there was not a bunch of stuff flying around up there, and there was also not cyberspace, okay? The hackers and all that stuff, which is now a dimension of warfare that we have to be concerned with. So we'll talk about a little bit of that and how the Academy prepares the leaders of tomorrow for flying and space operations and cyber operations and all the other support fields. Okay, it is 7,200 feet here in elevation. So if you get a little bit, winded because the air is rare, there's some benches along the way. Let me know if you're feeling queasy, and we'll take a break. We'll find some shade, and we'll get you taken care of. Okay, any questions before we get started? All righty, let's go. So, you guys remember a show called Hogan's Heroes?
Oh yeah.
Right, Robert Crane. Well, back then, World War II, the Air Force, we didn't have an Air Force. The Air Force was part of the Army. It was called the Army Air Corps. And the Air Force didn't become a separate service until 1947. Okay, and so in fact, the 18th of September 1947, so next month, we have a birthday, the Air Force birthday. So if y'all come back, we'll have some cake, okay? So after World War II, the Air Force, air power is getting real big. They said, we need a separate service. It's getting too big to be a part of the ground forces. So a commission stood up and said, well, if we're going to have a separate Air Force, why don't we have a separate Air Force Academy? We have West Point for the Army, we have Annapolis for the Navy. Why don't we have a separate Air Force Academy? So a year after the Air Force stood up, a commission was stood up, and they started looking at the possibility, where would you put it, how big would it be, and so on. And they looked at 580 different locations, and they necked that down to 3 locations. One was Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, one was Alton, Illinois, and one was here in Colorado Springs. So they went from 580 down to 3 candidates. And they had criteria. They said you need 15,000 acres at least, so you have room for growth for additional buildings. It has to be accessible by rail, air, and land. And it has to be a city nearby that has temperatures that are not extreme. Okay, later on today, it'll seem a little extreme, but when you look at other parts of the country, there's some very extreme temperatures. Okay, so this was one of the candidates, and the commission came out here, and they kind of looked around and they said, well, this is a nice area, and the local people in Colorado Springs, now Colorado Springs back then was pretty small, but they really wanted the academy. So they met this commission, and they wined them and dined them, they took good care of them, and they treated them like distinguished visitors, and they said, we'll give you $1 million toward development costs if you pick Colorado Springs. So the commission said, wow, these people really want this. This is a big deal. Then they got on the airplane, they flew to St. Louis to go to Alton, Illinois, and they were met with protesters. And the protesters, they said, wow, they're not very accommodating to the idea of having an academy here. Well, it's a good thing they didn't talk to the protesters. You know why? Because guess where the protesters were from? Colorado Springs. So the commission said, hey, okay, we'll do Colorado Springs. Now, the big city nearby wasn't necessarily at that time, back in the 50s, it wasn't Colorado Springs, it was Denver. Okay, so on the 1st of April, 1954, President Eisenhower signed into law that we were going to create an Air Force Academy. And you have inter-service rivalry, right? When you go to war, you're all brothers in arms, you're comrades. But there's rivalry between the academies, the Navy and West Point. So the other academies probably laugh a little bit when they say, well, President Eisenhower signed that on the 1st of April, which is
April Fool's Day.
April Fool's Day, right? But that's true. That's when it was signed. So the first class that came in, so things started moving real fast. First class that came in, there was no academy here. Construction had not started yet. First class went into Lowry Air Force Base in Denver. Class of 1959 started there. They did 3 years up there. And then after 3 years of construction, there was enough going on here that they could move down and finish their last year before they graduated in 1959. That class entered with 306. Back then it was all male. And 207 graduated in 1959 as part of the first class. So those first 3 classes started there, and then eventually they migrated down here. Now the chapel, we're going to end up on the chapel wall. When you go to the chapel, make sure you go and see all 4 chapels. It's really 4 in 1. Upstairs you have the Protestant, downstairs you have the Catholic, and then you have the Jewish in back, and then you have a small Buddhist chapel in there also. So it's 4 in 1. Don't miss those other sites. That chapel is going to go down next month for renovation. Originally that chapel cost $3.5 million to build. It's going to cost $158 million to renovate. Amazing. So that's what inflation does over time. And it took 4 years to build. The renovation is going to take 4 years. So there's going to be a class that enters here that's going to hear nothing but hammering and whatnot going on with the renovation at the chapel.
Will it be closed throughout the renovation?
I think for the most part, it'll be closed, except for looking at the exterior. I don't know if they're going to do it by sections, but I think with that kind of major construction, it's so tall, it's glass and aluminum, I don't know if they'll want people being around that. So the Academy reservation, it goes up about halfway up that ridge line there. It's 18,500 acres. Now, I didn't know what an acre is. It's kind of like about the size of a football field without the end zones, and that's 29 square miles. We're going to walk down to the cadet area. You can see some of those buildings here. We'll take a look and talk about some of those. But you have to understand that there's also 20,000 people that support the mission here. So this series of ridge lines and valleys that goes out here has buildings that are kind of by design tucked into the tree line. They don't want those to be prominent and visible like they do the Academy Cadet area. When you're driving down the interstate, you can see the chapel itself, the 17 spires. You can see the thing looks like a tail of an airplane. That's actually Polaris Hall. It points at the North Star. That's the Center for Character and Leadership Development. So that facade, they wanted that to be unique. There's a couple buildings here. You can just barely see the top of them. That's the club, the Association of Graduates building. There's some stuff there you might want to visit. It's not very far, a couple miles that way. There's the Heritage Trail, and there's a Southeast Asia memorial there that has a large bronze statue of Lance Saigon, who was the only Academy graduate to earn the Medal of Honor in Vietnam. He died in January 1968. There's Falcon Stadium. Right now, nothing going on there, but football season's starting to gin up. There's the airfield. There's a couple aircraft. There's an A-10 fighter down there. There's a T-38. And you maybe see some of the operations. Today, you're probably going to see some of the glider operations, maybe some of the parachuting that goes on. The airfield is one of the busiest in America in terms of number of sorties that are flown. And the programs there, the glider program and the skydiving program, are optional for cadets, but about 95% of them participate anyway. So one of the girls we just sponsored that just graduated, she did the skydiving program. She was also on the intercollegiate diving team. And I kind of thought, well, that's the same kind of thing, just a little higher. She enjoyed doing that. She's the one going to pilot training right now in Oklahoma. So 20,000 people, the support buildings, and then the company from Chicago that designed the academy is called Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. And they were set to put together the initial design, the concept and everything, including the chapel. And they started work on that, and the chapel was completed in '63. Like I said, the academy there was enough of the buildings and the academic building and whatnot to start classes, so 59 could graduate from this location. Okay, we're going to walk down there just a little bit, and we'll do another talk. Any questions before we walk down? Okay, to come to the academy, the qualifications are between age 17 and 24. You have to be at least 4'10". You can't be over 6'8". So the basketball team, you know, they're thinking, man, 6'8". I mean, for a basketball team, that's not super tall. So basketball, you know, the cadets here and football, it's challenging because you almost have to be the size so you can stuff you into a fighter cockpit someday. So the weight is between 117 pounds to 227 pounds. Now you see on the Air Force football team, you know, sometimes I'll have 300-pound linemen that are trying to take on 400-pound linemen. So there's a waiver during the season they can bulk up, but then by the time they graduate and off season, they have to meet the standard weight limits. So their weights are going up and down. But they're athletes. And one thing I want to mention, you know, we talk about competition between the academies. Football, right? There's 27 intercollegiate Division 1A sports here, one of which is football. Well, we play the other academies in football every year, and there's something called the Commander-in-Chief's Trophy. Yeah. The Commander-in-Chief is the President of the United States. And whatever service academy wins that inter-service rivalry, the seniors from the football team go and meet the President. And then they give him a jersey, and he gives them the big trophy, and they put your name on it, and it's all the names of all the winners have been on there. Air Force has won that, 20 times. Navy has won it 15 times. Army has won it 8 times. Unfortunately, Army has won it the last 2 times, and they're really good. They run the option. We run the option. They run it very well. And I think Army is in the top 25 in the nation this year, that they're ranked. So they're going to be tough this year. So that's the Commander-in-Chief's Trophy, a little inter-service rivalry. There is an exchange program. So during the junior year, one semester of your junior year, some cadets can apply to go to West Point or to Annapolis. They take only 6 out of 1,000 or 1,200. And 6 go to West Point from here, 6 go to Annapolis, and vice versa. So one of my roommates went to the West Point, the U.S. Military Academy. So I said, hey, I'll sign up. I'll take one of these guys. And back then it was all guys. So when I was here, it was half male, and then the women came in the last 2 years. So I saw the transition. And so I got an Annapolis cadet, okay, a roommate, and that was tough during the football week because they are, you know, the Air Force guys, they came in and stole his uniforms. So he had jeans on, he went to class. The instructors didn't like that. There's a lot of problems ensued. And yeah, water under the door at midnight, and alarm clocks hidden all over the room, going off every hour during the night. Now this guy, Bowersox, so he came to the Air Force Academy for 1 semester. And he got his jump wings right down there at the airfield, and the Navy requires 10 jumps. I only needed 5 jumps, and the Army required 5 jumps to get your jump wings. Navy requires 10. So he got 10 jumps here. He got his jump wings through the Air Force. He was here for a semester. Later, years later, I was flying F-4 fighters out of Southern California. We diverted into Edwards, where they trained test pilots. And there was Bowersox, a Navy, he flew off of carriers, and he was going through the Air Force test pilot school. Years later, I was watching CNN, and they were talking about the space shuttle repairing the Hubble telescope. And they said the commander of the space shuttle, Ken Bowersox, they're going to bring it in and do this and that and exchange all these electronic components and whatnot. So he became an astronaut, flew 5 space shuttle missions. You can Google Ken Bowersox, go to YouTube. He's very well spoken, wonderful guy, very good wrestler. By the way, he never opened a book. Straight A's, never opened a book. And he was the youngest commander of the space shuttle ever. At age 38 and 10 months, he commanded the space shuttle. You remember we had the space shuttle disaster going up? There was another one that came in and burned up. Bowersox went up on that one, I think it was the Columbia.
Yeah.
And he was dropped off. He went up with the Columbia, was dropped off at the International Space Station. And then his friends who were on that one that came and burned up, I think it went and crash landed over Texas. So Bowersox was up there in the International Space Station, didn't have a ride home. We'd canceled the space shuttle program. So he got back via the Russians, and he was somewhere in Kazakhstan or the water around there with a couple of cosmonauts, and he talks about that if you go to YouTube, Bowersox. What an amazing guy, amazing guy. So that exchange program is alive and well. Also, there are about 40 foreign cadets here at the Academy, and they don't come from countries that have large air forces or large academies themselves, like the United Kingdom or whatnot, France, Germany. They come from smaller countries, so about 10 of them graduate every year. So there's 10 in the senior class, 10 in the junior class, thereabouts. In my squadron, we had a guy from Colombia, very, very smart guy, very good soccer player. So we won a lot of soccer games just because of that one guy. So SATs and ACT scores, the national average is about 21. The cadets here, academically, they're pretty much the top of their high school class. The class that just graduated in 2019, in high school they had an average GPA of 3.84. Their SAT scores were 1314. The national average is 1060. ACT scores, they average about 30 or so in all four areas, maybe a little over 30. The national average is about 21. 80% of cadets were in the top 20% of their graduating class. About 80% lettered in at least one varsity sport, and about 80% participated in some kind of leaderships, class president, vice president, Eagle Scout, club presidents, whatnot. One of the big things, we think academics and we think athletics, but one of the biggest thing is leadership and integrity. Okay, the Academy teaches integrity, and that's taught from day one until they graduate. So that's very robust, and the Academy almost cares. I mean, it's the balance of those three areas. When you get into the Air Force, you care a lot about leading human beings, not the fact that you can do calculus, okay? That is not as important. Humans are more complicated than doing math. So leadership, your ability to inspire and lead people like you saw in the movie there, is very, very important, and that's nurtured here. Oh yeah, if you haven't seen the movie, it goes every hour and half hour. It's 21 minutes, and it really gives you a nice visual into the type of military training and academics that goes on. Okay, questions before we go down to the chapel area?
What is the percentage of cadets that graduate every year?
The attrition is about 20% now. Back in the old days, it was about 40%. I think there's a problem when you're trading 40% with your investment. You're bringing people in and you're investing. And the cadets, their first 2 years, they owe no commitment. But then there's a signing. You have to sign a paper one night. It's commitment night. And once you sign that paper, at that point, the last 2 years, if you drop out or choose to quit, then you owe the Air Force service as an enlisted person, or you have to pay back some portion of the money. So your first 2 years, and all those credits will transfer. The credits, a very strong academic institution. There are 31 different academic majors. All cadets graduate with a Bachelor of Science degree. There are 11 minors, some of them most of them in languages like French or Arabic or Chinese or whatnot. So one of our cadets minored in French, the other one minored in Arabic.
And what's the male to female?
Females are about 26%. Now the females, when they come in, like the class of 2019 came in, 26% of that class was female, but when they graduated, 31% of the class was female. So the females are treated out at a lower rate. And I think that's because females, they know they're making a career choice, and they probably think it through longer. They're going, I'm gonna get out of the norm here. We know we just had 2 girls, right, we sponsored. And they're pretty committed that, okay, if I'm gonna start down a military career track, I wanna pursue it. I don't wanna go and try it out and then maybe I'll like it, maybe I won't. So that the females, they graduate at a higher percentage rate than they enter. About 42% went to pilot training in that class that just graduated. 43 cadets or second lieutenants went directly into unmanned aerial vehicle operations. We do a lot of stuff with unmanned aerial vehicles now, a lot of combat operations. Some go into, we slide over a little bit. Some go into space operations. So we have that now as a career field in the Air Force, very important career field. All the services depend on the intelligence, infrared warning, communications, GPS. If you lose space, you lose a lot of the joint battle. So, and cyberspace too. You got to think about that in joint operations. Okay, other questions? Okay, let's walk now. This black fence here, this was not always here. So when I was a cadet, civilians could come up and walk around, walk down into the dormitory area and everything. I mean, they didn't have much they could do there. But this was built in 2004 after the 9/11 attack. So you got to remember that the cadets that graduate from here, they all become second lieutenants and they become warriors or some support field. Most of them are operations, so a pilot or unmanned aerial vehicles. So they become warriors. And the stuff going on in the world in Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria or whatnot, the Air Force is a very integral part of that. So these cadets, they are targets. So you have to understand that protecting them from someone getting onto the academy and someone doing some kind of a crazy incident here, like you're seeing a lot recently in the nation. So that fence, you can't get through that unless you have a common access card with a chip in it. So I can't even get in there. The ramp that you see here, this ramp that goes down, and there's another one on the near side of the chapel. Up until 1973, it was mandatory for cadets to attend chapel on Sunday. And they marched. So they marched from Vandenberg Hall and in front of Cy John Hall. They marched up those ramps and were attending mandatory chapel services up until 1973. 73, they declared that unconstitutional, so they don't do that anymore. Cadets of privileges, you have more when you're a senior than when you're a freshman, but all cadets can get off on Saturday or Sunday to attend chapel services downtown, because you have different denominations of Protestant chapel. So this is a generic Protestant service upstairs. So if you're a specific Baptist or something else or Mormon or whatnot, there are only 4 chapels here. So the cadets can go downtown to attend a specific church if they choose to do so. This building here is Harmon Hall. That's where the superintendent, 3-star general, and he works there, so he oversees the entire thing. He's the big boss. And that's the administrative building. His name is Jay Silveria, Lieutenant General Jay Silveria. Do you remember that show, The Lone Ranger? Okay, I remember that. I remember seeing it black and white. Well, there was a Lone Ranger, was Clayton Moore, and you remember Tonto? You know what his real name was?
Jay Silverheels.
Jay Silverheels. His name is Jay Silveria. So his fighter pilot call sign is Tonto. And I know him we were stationed together in England, and he's now 3-star. This building, this is Polaris. You can't go inside, but you can walk around. The reason for this large superstructure, it points at the North Star, thinking of integrity, unwavering, unchanging integrity, because all stars revolve around the North Star, right? It actually doesn't move. Well, actually it does move. Some cadet astro major pointed out that in 20 million years, that will no longer point at the North Star because suns precess. So if the Academy is here in 20 million years, they may have to renovate that building and move it a degree or so. That superstructure was built all with volunteer donations. That is the Center for Character and Leadership Development. So the training and the speakers that they bring in are very important in the entire program of addressing issues of integrity and honor and basically doing the right thing. So under that superstructure, there are meeting rooms and conference halls, and guest speakers come in there and talk. Very important beyond that is that white wall. That is Arnold Hall. That's open to the public. They have a food court in there. They have a huge formal ballroom, Starbucks, and a bunch of plaques and stuff. Usually that's where the Commander-in-Chief's trophy is kept when the Air Force wins it, which is most of the time. It's not there right now. That's an important building because I met my wife there, okay? And that we were married in the chapel a year later in the downstairs in the Catholic chapel. So that's an important building, and that's an important building. The next most important building is the far one down there with the low black roof. That is the Chow Hall, okay? And I'd like to thank all of you for paying your taxes because you paid for many meals for me for that building there, as well as my education. By the way, the education today, for a cadet, it cost $487,000 to get one cadet through, of which $195,000 is cost for the academic program. Okay, you have the flying program, you have the infrastructure. So when you roll in all those costs, the infrastructure, cutting the grass, the buildings, and all that, it's about $500,000 per graduate. The cadets earn about $1,100 while they're going to the academy, but they pay for their uniforms, they pay for their computer, they pay for athletic ticket. That all comes out automatically. They pay for laundry services. So they don't see $1,100. They probably see a few $100s at the end of the month. They cannot have cars their first 2 years. They can have them their last 2 years. When I went, it was 3 and 1. We could only have them our senior year. So back then we did a lot of hitchhiking or riding the bus. Or basically we went to Arnold Hall. Okay, questions before we move down?